Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining the book podcast. My name is Ilona Gabinsky, and I will be moderating today's conversation with Vishal Shukla and Zaid Khan. So let me first quickly introduce our guests. First, Vishal Shukla. Vishal recently published a new book, Deciding the Future, Building New Networks for the AI Era. And he's the co-founder and CEO of Aviz Networks, with 20 plus years in networking leadership across NVIDIA, Mellanox, IBM, Cisco, and Nortel. And joining him is Zaid Khan. Zaid helped make open networking real at hyperscale, mostly notably driving Sonic at LinkedIn. He later led infrastructure and AI systems at Microsoft, and today he is the co-founder and CEO of Neuron Factory. So here is the book we're discussing today. And as I mentioned, the title of the book is Deciding the Future, Building New Networks for the AI Era. And today specifically, we will be focusing on one part of the book that talks about what's new, why networks in the AI era need a new way of thinking. So as we all see, AI is really compressing everything from model generations, hardware refresh cycles, and the window to make foundational decisions. And one of the biggest decisions hiding in plain sight is the network. So this book separates two problems that people often mix together. Networks for AI, so how we build fabrics that can carry AI traffic, and AI for networks, how we use AI to operate and secure networks once they exist. So Zaid, you gave the quote for this book. You provided this quote. I will read it out loud. So the AI era compresses everything. Your network choices today will either enable or block your AI strategy for the next decade. So in your opinion, what are leaders underestimating when they treat the networks as just plumbing, and what they really need to look forward in this new AI era?
Yeah, thank you very much, Ilona, and great to be here with Vishal. I think it's really an important topic, awesome book. Look, as I was kind of reading it and thinking about it, and why it kind of inspired me to write this quote is because I think that for the last 20 plus years as we've been building networks, it's been a very sort of incremental shift, right? Like compute sort of like has a stepping function every time, and then that stepping function translates to stepping functions inside compute systems. So bandwidth has in the last 15, 20 years been a very sort of like step function approach. Network engineers look for predictability, safe, I'm gonna scale from 10 gig to 20 gig to 50 gig, and PCI is gonna scale this way. Super like well organized, predictable, and they loved it, right? Because it's like I can plan things, I can do all these things, and most of the workloads sort of govern that with Intel taking out one generation of CPU, and AMD and everybody, they all had a very, very step function approach, right? So fast forward after I think 2022 and ChatGPT and everything came out, and when we were actually building the early supercomputers at Microsoft, the word is radical. The word was a radical shift, right? So when AI came into the picture as the workload, it completely changed the game, right? You now no longer have a small incremental predictable step up. You have actually a monumental shift. AI itself was a tectonic shift in the industry. So imagine the network, right? The network is also a very, very massive shift, right? You're talking about now, people are talking about 200 gig SerDes now, and that was like 5 years ago was like people are still surviving with 50 gig SerDes. I mean, there was like the shift is massive, right? So what I mean by choices today, right? Like if you make the wrong choices now, you are going to be far behind in a very, very fast way, right? Because you're not able to sort of keep up. You make sort of the wrong choices, right? So like, I'm still going to do my spine and leaf the way I do. A wrong answer, right? That does not work today. You have to think about scale up, scale out, all this kind of things. You have to think about, am I building a training internet network, or I'm building an inference network, or I'm scaling out an inference network, that all these things, and the bandwidth is magnitude, right? And the latency is also massive, right? It's different. It's latency sensitive stuff you're building. So basically, that the choices of when you're building the network is you got to really think that you got to align yourself with the chip, right? So basically, today NVIDIA is taking out GB200. In VR200, the shift is massive, and then after that, it's going to be even more massive, right? So you're looking at 2028, you're going to be thinking about co-packaged optics on lasers on the chips itself. Just like all this stuff because the shifts in compute are very, very big, and so that's kind of like what I mean is that like now we need to sit back and think about like all of these things, all of these different dimensions that have to actually feed back into sort of like how am I going to build and shape my network. That's kind of like how I'm going to summarize it. So
yeah, this is great. Thank you for such a great explanation of that. So basically, what I hear is that's one decision that leaders need to do today about this network choices and whether they enable AI or block AI. It can really become really painful to undo later on if they make the wrong choice.
absolutely, it's super critical. I mean, you can't do things you can't build really good training platforms without a really, really good network, right? Yeah.
Right. So, and Vishal, right now I would like to come back to your book. So you wrote this book, and in one sentence, what was that moment that made you really think and say, okay, this needs a book, and specifically a decision book?
Yeah, so look, I mean, first of all, thank you for having me here. And I'll probably, try to give you a reply this, but it will be a little bit more than one line because it took time to essentially come to the conclusion that this requires, that much of time to write this book, right? So, me as, the co-founder CEO at Aviz Network has got this opportunity to talk to multiple different Fortune 100 to Fortune 1000 kind of, network architects, network executives, network operators, telcos, and pretty much, all different kind of verticals, right? And all these executives, architects, network operators, network operations guys, are talking about two different things, right? One is essentially this construct of how do we, automate better? How do we build versus buy? How do we think about TCO analysis? How do we think about a consistent return of investment? And how do we think about which protocol feature and everything which we have to use? So that's like one, a dimension of a typical RFP and RFI, which, they float. Now, there is a second dimension which is happening right now, which was not there in the past, was the design of network itself, is changing. I mean, it used to be, I mean, if you really see, used to be, three-tier design coming from Cisco at one point of time, and then it translated into leaf and spine. And now there are terms like scale up, scale out, scale across, and then on top of that, the compute also exhibiting different kind of properties, such as inferencing and training, which Zaid mentioned here. So it's basically there is a second dimension here, which kind of complicate the whole first dimension, TCO, ROI, build versus buy, how long my network will stay before it basically gonna be refreshed, and what are the automation considerations while the network itself is changing pretty fast, right? So there are a lot of questions and multiple different dimensions, and is a spectrum of knowledge which I have seen given with all different people we have talked. So that actually called for a book, and this book is essentially is an outcome of talking to multiple different vendors, ASIC vendors, switch vendors, analysts, listening to a lot of different customers, prospects, and taking care of what questions they have, and very good conversations which I have had and fortunate to have with these prospects. So that's how the book was written. I'm sorry it was more than one line, but that's what it is. Yes.
Yeah, I'm sure there was a lot that inspired you to write this book, and it has a very comprehensive agenda. So it has about 7 parts, and today we are focusing on one part that really talks about what's new. So what are the new things that you see in the network? So what are the new things that you see in the network? And why networks in this new AI era. So right now, I would really like to go to that, what's actually new. And one of the chapters of the book, it really zooms out into this, zooms out historically and says, applications change first and networks follow. And now AI forces another redesign. So Vishal, if you had to summarize that in plain language, what's the new way of thinking AI requires from your point of view?
Yeah, so look, I mean, traditionally, and in the book we have referred to history oftentimes, to see the patterns which has emerged in the industry again and again, right? And if you really see, I mean, what has changed is that every time the refresh used to happen in the industry, it used to happen because the server NIC speed has changed because the CPU and the memory and storage have changed. So of course, you can do better, and that's when the network refresh will happen, right? And aligned with that, some ways on where you will do the compute distributed or densely put at one place, or you will put it in cloud. Those things have changed a little bit, which kind of impacted networks a little bit. But what happened now is totally orthogonal, right? What is happening right now is that two things, right? One is that the compute speed is not changing linearly as it used to change in case of CPUs, right? It's actually changing exponentially. So that's one thing which is forcing the total disruption on how the networks used to be built. Now, on the other side, what is happening is that application expectation from the compute is also changing, exponentially. I mean, there didn't used to be like LLMs in the past, which will require very high dense compute clusters, which are today's requirement. And by the way, the testament of that, you see, the requirement of energy and the data centers and everything is because of there are LLMs which needs these massive computes. So right, so basically this is like a circle of application requires compute to be better, compute requires better LLM. So this is the circle is happening, but what puts them all together is networks, right? And that's why network is getting disrupted. So the new way of thinking about networks in AI era is not just tied with a linear growth of your bandwidth requirement, or linear growth of the number of compute which you will require. It's essentially multidimensional, because the compute is changing exponentially, your applications are changing exponentially, and essentially the customers requires the AI first software, AI first applications, AI first consumption. So there's no longer a choice, it has to be done, right? So this is a new way of thinking. And of course, if you look from the third dimension, which is the protocols and the way of design and all these kind of things, those all details are in the book. But fundamentally is the requirement of the compute and application, which has traditionally driven networks in the past. Those things are changing exponentially. So of course, the network way of thinking has to change as well.
Yeah, that's right. And Zaid, from your side, what's the most common yesterday logic you still see is happening? And the follow-up question I have is, where do teams get surprised first?
Yeah, that's a good question. As Vishal was actually talking, it occurred to me that like what his statement was very powerful about how this rapid change is happening. I was thinking if I took a time machine and I went like 50 years ahead, and I looked at a network, should look completely different to me, right? Like it should be completely radically different. And I'm saying, hey, I've been doing networks for a while. I don't even understand this thing. I mean, that's the kind of change that'll happen in 50 years, I think, right? So going back to sort of what you're saying, there's a bit of a dichotomy here, I think, if that's the right word I can use. Is basically there's mindset change, like I've been building networks this way, and that's sort of like one way of thinking. But also there are severe limitations that we're hitting against in networking. Let's not forget that, right? So for example, copper is the biggest constraint right now in a network, right? So the cost of building an AI network is very, very expensive, right? So you can't like say, oh, I'm just gonna like string this thing with all fiber and spread it across. No, because in AI models, they all need to be in one rack very tight. And now the amount of compute inside a rack is exponentially very, very high, right? The density means multiple exaflops that are happening. Before, you're not talking about exaflops in a rack. Now you're talking about exaflops in a rack. So when you think about all the network that ties all these chips together, right? We've now, hit this copper bound limit. And again, if you look at that graph that Vishal was talking about, the exponential growth, like you got 100x growth in models, but the network and the hardware, they're just 2% growth, right? If you think about it, right, from just like a scale perspective. So what that means is now you've got one thing, even though you have the mindset, yes, I want to go change the network, you do have some of these limitations. I'm stuck with copper. I got 1.4 meters between these chips that I can tie up. These are serious problems, SerDes limitations, all these things. So I would say that people who are building networks really have to think about it differently. Not like, I understand SerDes was done this way before, hence it's going to be like this for the next 5 years. No, it's not, right? You can see vendors like NVIDIA already pushing the boundary and the limits on hey, let's bring co-packaged optics sooner. However, that's hard to. Landing 1,000 lasers onto a chip is not easy. You got to think about it. So I think that there's quite a lot of that. What I would say is that for the network operator implementer, the biggest sort of thinking is that how do I change how do I think about the observability of my network? I used to think about it this way. Now with AI, I've got to think about it this way. And let's not forget, you can use AI to change the observability of your network, right? So now you have more and more granular things that you can have control of. And so I think that this is kind of how I would, sort of put together hey, yesterday's thinking versus how you should think about going forward, right? If I go to sort of put in that context, yeah.
So I have a follow-up question to both Vishal, you and Zaid. So we talked about what happened in history. You also mentioned what will happen maybe in 50 years. So considering all that and what we know what happened in history, what's one myth you wish people would stop repeating about AI networking from your point of view?
That's a good question. I'm trying to think.
Well, let me take a stab. Something comes in my mind on this one, right? So look, let's go back to history. Look at cloud, right? When the cloud transformation was happening, and I was right in the mix of it and everything, right? I seen that there was a huge rush from the enterprises to actually, just put everything on cloud. Enterprises, the software and everything, because of course the automation was easy and there was centralized place and no more requirement of waiting for server for one month and all these kind of things, right? So there was a huge rush. A lot of ecosystem, in Silicon Valley, startup came up with a forklift and seamless integration, this and that. But after the massive transformation happened, the thing which hit these customers was essentially the cost, right? And what happened after that, the commoditization of that cost start to happen with the big, cloud providers who started running, the cost of the VMs, the cost of the containers down, right? So I like to think that it's not going to be different in this case, right? So right now the rush is to build these AI factories right now, right? And energy is a blocker, and data center is a blocker, procurement of the GPU is a blocker, network is a blocker, and everything. But once it is done, right, it will actually get to a point where there will be cost per token, which is basically cost for AI served, will become the cost of good sales, right? I mean, it will be a COGS for the companies who are essentially using these AI clusters. So the smart people who basically transformed into the cloud at that point of time, they designed it in that way that it was not a single bucket dependency transformation. It was essentially done it in a way that they were able to use the best available cloud, and best means better in features, faster in availability, and a consistent ROI provider, right? So the people who designed the cloud transformation that way, they were able to keep their cogs down, and in that way, putting their margins up in whatever services they provide. So I think something similar will needs to happen in AI factory. If you design the AI factory in a way that you are able to consume the technologies which are better, and you are able to consume it faster, and you are able to keep the consistent return of investment, which, by the way, like in any hardware thing, commoditization happens, and the margins and everything will come under pressure. So you design it in a way that it is not a single source dependency is there, so you can keep your costs down. And by the way, if you do that, then you have to standardize the automation, right? Standardize the consumption. So those are certain things which I think the executive should keep in mind, by the historic way out how it turned out in cloud. And the cloud was there, but then the multi-cloud become a term which was not a term when actually transformation was happening. So this is one thing comes in my mind on on this one. Yeah.
Yeah, so this networking for AI, right? That all this transformation that's happening right now, does it apply to only people who run GPUs?
So look, I mean, right now the market hype is all about GPUs, right? I mean, it's essentially it talk about that if you are talking networks for AI, it means for GPU. But I beg to differ here, because more than 50% of the traffic on internet right now is actually either generated by AIs or destined towards the LLMs and all these kind of things. So you are part of, even if you don't have a GPU in your networks, you are essentially part of the AI wave already. And I like to think, and talking to all different customers who are basically increasing their bandwidths, not because they are putting GPUs, by the way. Their traffic is increasing because the applications which used to generate, let's say, 1 gig of data, now generates like 100 gig of data, or requires 100 gigs of data, right? I mean, this is like the text has become a high def video. I mean, that's what it is, because you can generate high def video pretty easily by a GPU, as compared to paying a photographer and doing all that kind of thing. So it becomes very easy. So people are generating, right? So bandwidth is increasing, and I like to think that this is a place where you can actually start for the networks for AI, and then make that as a recipe, so that when you get to deploying a GPU, which you will, it's not the matter of you will not, it's just a matter of when, right? At that point of time, you have all the the bits and pieces, the standardization and everything ready for consuming the GPUs in the right way with the right design, and that's the best place to start, actually. That's what I like to tell people who talk. And Zaid, on these two
Yeah.
questions,
Actually, the last question, I love the question, right, that Ilona raised, because basically I think my answer to that is we've only seen the beginning of the application space, just the early stage, right? You can see, like, right now, so many people, like, if I'm thinking, like, as a marketing person, right, they use Nano Banana and go create something, right? They are doing real-time video editing, right, so the constraint of the network just will become much more prominent, right? So I think that we have yet to see all the new wave of applications that is going to come from your desktop to LLMs, right, out there. And that's going to radically change. That's going to shape the network very differently. So even if you're thinking, oh, I don't have GPUs in my network, well, guess what? You're going to see a very, very different traffic pattern, right? You're going to see people that are using AI applications in a completely different way than sort of like the way they were using, like, cloud, right, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. This is what we are seeing it already, by the way, in traffic patterns in some of our customers. Since the LLM came in, it's just like totally different, even though the customers don't have GPUs. That's
Yeah.
interesting, right?
Yeah,
So,
exactly. Like how many people, like, they are completely changing their work habits, right? And
yes.
completely right. So every department in an organization has got an AI strategy, and they're going to implement something that is going to shape the sort of the driving of the network, bandwidth, all of these things. Yeah.
One more point I would like to add is basically one more thing which is going to happen is essentially, which is not very visible in all the AI factory conversation, is the security and the compliances, which traditionally is there in the data centers today because it's a very matured and a set system. But right now, AI factory production is something people are busy in making those factories, gathering energy and everything. but the security and compliances of these networks and these workloads will become very, very important for two reasons, right? I mean, because this is supposedly intelligence, right? So of course the security of an intelligent and the data heavy things will actually need more focus, and the compliances will be heavy. The other point is that because they are so good in compute. I mean, you have this DPUs sitting right at the edge of every GPU. You can actually now run security and the deep packet inspection and these kind of things right at the edge itself, right? Which will shape again the way network security used to happen, right? I mean, earlier it used to be you have a dumb NIC. I mean, how much you can run on that, right? But now you have an intelligent system, and it will be better. You basically focus things on security. So how it will turn out, that will be a total different, ball game. And this is gonna come in future and pretty fast. That's another thing which will, kind of influence that how the network's gonna be changing because of these things.
Right, right. So for a minute, I would like to go back to one of the parts of the book that where you talk about this mental model that helps leaders challenge vendors and teams and avoid building that AI engine on yesterday's tools. And I think, Zaid, you also mentioned those yesterday's tools just recently. So what, in your opinion, what are the 2-3 questions you want every leader to ask in a steering committee? Vishal, this question is for you and Zaid.
Okay, I mean, some things comes to my mind is that, are we making an engine which is designed to absorb, the changes which are pretty fast happening in the infrastructure? That's number one, right? Is this engine can absorb the changes? I mean, think about it. I mean, in last GTC, Jensen actually, given the next 3 years of the roadmap, not because they wanted to, just give the roadmap just like that, because they are looking for an ecosystem to be developed alongside with, their powerful GPUs. So at least the consumption of the technology can go in tandem with the advancement of technology, right? So vendors are essentially creating, innovating at a very fast pace. So the first question people should ask when they are looking for this strategy is that, is my engine ready to absorb the technology at which the technology is being developed, right? That's number one. Number two is that, are we able to operate it at that speed and leverage the best innovation which is coming? So what level of standardization you are doing? I mean, because if your hardware is changing, so where do you standardize? Do you standardize on network operating system, or do you standardize on the network automation layer, right? And then you have to look for the vendor strategy which is not dependent on a single, it needs to be in a way that it can absorb the better, faster, and a consistent ROI provider mechanism over and over again, which means that don't put all your eggs in one basket. Standardize and control that standardization layer at your end, while creating a system which is basically open to absorb any technology. And hyperscalers are pretty good example, and Zaid, you built that system multiple times for different companies. So it's no different than that. It's essentially just got a little bit more complex, because now you have to think about compute as well, and this is changing actually faster than the old times. So it becomes a little bit faster, a little bit complex, but the principles are same. And by the way, it's going to be more expensive if you don't do it now. So that's another thing. So that's what I think. Yes.
Yeah.
Zaid, anything you would like to add?
Yeah, look, Vishal said everything really well here. I mean, I hit the nail on the head on other points here. I think if I were to just add, it's like, I think that the steering committee or whoever the leaders that are asking the questions is, I would say that the question they should be asking is, not only are you, keeping up and standardizing and all these things, but are you doing it with AI? Are you bringing in the right level? Now that we are in the AI era, are you using AI to understand networks, sustain networks, operate networks? All these things, cannot be done with yesterday's tools, right? So to speak. That's what I kind of like mentioned, I think, before. They have to be completely rewritten. I mean, it's time people rewrite stacks. It's time people rewrite tools. It's like it's a new world. Like, wake up, don't think that, oh, I'm gonna just sprinkle a little bit of AI on this tool that I built like 10 years ago. Like, that's gonna be a very incremental shift. You have to start thinking, okay, networks are changing, are going to radically change. How am I going to keep up my telemetry? How am I going to, ensure that my COGS is always in line, and TCO, and these things all are radically going to change. And so I think that, like, if I was, as I was asking, hey, are you doing all these things? And also, like, think about it, right? Like, now, like, the team growth, right? Like, as you're scaling the network, are you giving uh, the humans the right tools to sort of do their job better, right? It's not about it's running, it's lean, but also, like, with AI, automation is radically changing, right? It's not longer the old way of automation. It's like a new way of thinking. So, like, are your engineers spending better time, building infrastructure, less worried about sort of the old way of how networks were built, because now they are able to sort of, like, let things, sort of run on their own, right? Like, agents can control networks now very, very easily, right? Are they doing all these things well? So I think that's the kind of, like, as a leadership level, you should be, up leveling the whole thinking about the network of the future, right?
Yeah. And this brings me to my last question, actually. So, Zaid, if someone listening has to act this quarter, where do they start? So, what would you say is the one decision you'd push a leader to make this quarter based on what you've seen at scale already?
I think the decision they need to make is think AI first, right? Think AI first, end to end, right? Think AI first, end to end, because the ship has sailed to be. You're catching up at this point, right? Anyone who is, like, thinking about this, because if you're not thinking AI first, then you're not thinking about all the problems from the beginning, and all the things that Vishal and I were just chatting about, whether it's history or where it's going in the future. If you're not thinking AI first, you're not thinking about the right way of solving the problem. Uh, Fundamentally, you'll start the wrong way if you don't think AI first.
Yeah. And Vishal, what do you think? There's one decision you hope changes after someone reads your book.
Well, I think they need to, AI first is essentially what Zaid said, but on top of it is basically it's a little bit more wider and a little bit more deeper as than it looks from outside. So start, ASAP on essentially, if you want to do something, 6 months down the line or a year down the line, the right time to start is now, right? And basically start asking these questions which we discussed in our podcast, to essentially the internal teams, to your vendors, and essentially make a mental model on how you're going to be doing this thing, right? So starting is very important. I believe in the one decision you can make pretty easily is to start. So
Yeah.
that's one decision you should make.
Yeah,
So
this is great. So, Vishal and Zai, thank you very much for joining this podcast. And to our listeners, so here's the first copy of the book, and this is a sample, but you can now scan this QR code, which will take you to the landing page where you can order the book. And if you're really trying to separate, hype from decisions, this book is built to give you frameworks and scorecards to make assumptions visible and defend your choices. Again, thank you very much for joining the podcast.